All right, welcome to this week's tutorial. It's going to be on compression. In this video, we're going to get an introduction to it and the first parameter that we use, which is the threshold. So simply enough, you can think of compressor as an automatic volume control. It's that simple. By the end of today's lesson, you'll have a full understanding of the main parameters that you set this automatic volume control with. So let's just have a listen to what I mean by that and what one of its main purposes is. So if we listen to this kick drum, there's a huge volume difference between the first and the third hit, and you can see that as well as hear it. Now you don't hear that in professional recordings because they've been leveled out or they've been compressed and more consistent. So let's just hear what a compressor does. Imagine we've set this up and it's our automatic volume control. Straight away, we get a much more consistent level, volume, and then our ability to listen to it and hear the music is greatly improved. Instead of just going, wow, that's really loud, all of a sudden we're just hearing a kick drum playing a rhythm and it's really accessible. So that's our very first use of a compressor. It's to catch these really loud parts and turn them down, or it's to zoom in on these really quiet parts and turn them up. And that is actually almost the definition of a compressor. So that's how a compressor works when it's in this peak mode, when it's responding to peak volume. So it compresses a signal, which reduces the dynamic range, and it does this by turning the quiet sounds up and turning the loud sounds down. So overall, if we look at this, what that means is that we get something that is more consistent. And there you go. You can see that the average volume or the overall volume is more consistent. The loud parts have been turned down and those quiet parts have come up. And that's what makes it a little bit easier to digest with our ears compared to those big volume differences. So that is our first use of the compressor. There's three that we'll go through, but that's the first one. It was the reason it was invented, and it's the first technical one that we use. I call it technical because it's really a mixing application of the compressor. And we're trying to do the job while being transparent. So the listener can't hear the compressor working. It's just making things better. Okay, that's our aim. Now, just a quick one before we get into it. Dynamic range. All these notes are here in the slides again, by the way. There's heaps of notes this week, actually. So do take the time to go through them because we won't be going through them step by step in class. But there's even extra reading. So dynamic range is the difference between the loudest part of a sample and the quietest part of the sample. So snares or drums or anything percussive have quite a large dynamic range, where maybe more sustained notes, maybe like a bass line or something like that, don't have as much difference between the loud and quiet part. The reason why this definition is important is because compressors, by their definition, reduce that dynamic range. Okay, so again, they're reducing the overall volume, so they're actually making things quieter, contrary to popular belief. But we'll get to that. So if I get rid of my one I prepared earlier and just put on the generic compressor under audio effects, you can see it comes with three views. And for this very first time, we're going to use this view because it's a little bit more visual and it helps us to digest the concept. So there's a thing called a threshold. Okay, it's in every view, and in this one, it's the blue line. Okay. Now, the compressor does absolutely nothing unless the threshold is crossed. Let's have a listen. absolutely doing nothing. So to make the compressor work, makes sense, right? You've got to lower the threshold until the threshold is crossed. And what that means is when the threshold is crossed, the compressor will compress the volume over that threshold. So think of it like chopping the hedges or mowing the lawn. When you get rid of those big peaks, that's the volume reduction that's happening right there. And if we go well into the sample, you can hear it become quieter. Let's listen. Now that's okay as long as it's doing its job of creating a smooth and consistent sound, which it kind of is. Not perfect because we're only moving one parameter, but if your goal with the compressor is to at least just catch those really loud parts and make them more consistent, you can see it's actually almost possible just with the threshold. And that's why I like to think of it as the automatic volume control. So what I want you to do now is just put a compressor on this kick drum, bring the threshold down, and just see if you can get a bit more of a consistent volume. Sweet.